Hey guys, tonight we're taking a walk through the blazing deserts of ancient Persia, where somehow, against every logical expectation, people managed to make ice. Yes, real, actual ice, in the middle of an arid landscape where you can't even keep a fig leaf fresh. Imagine trudging through blistering sunlight, your sandals practically melting on sand that sizzles like a skillet, and stumbling across a domed mud structure filled with ice blocks. Ice! You probably wouldn't survive more than a day out here without a sun hat and 4 gallons of water, but that's okay, because tonight you're here to fall asleep, not to sweat it out. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from and what time it is by you. I love seeing how far this sleepy little channel travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of the Dasht-e-Kavir, Iran's vast salt desert. The air smells faintly of dust and sun-baked clay. There's a shimmering heat haze ahead, rippling like water, though there's no water here for miles. The nearest tree is probably 1,000 years dead. But there's something stranger than trees on the horizon. A bulbous mud-brick dome rising from the earth like a half-buried spaceship. It looks ancient and sleepy, maybe even a little bored. This is a yakhchāl, one of the oldest known refrigerators on Earth. You shuffle closer, feeling the ground crunch with salt crystals and cracked pebbles. Your sandals scuff against wind-scoured stone. The heat makes everything shimmer like a dream, or maybe a mirage. But no, the dome is real. And behind it, there's a network of dried channels carved into the earth, like lazy veins waiting for water. Everything here was built to coax coolness out of a place that clearly never got the memo about winter.
Inside the yakhchāl, the air is surprisingly cool. Not snowstorm in Siberia cool, more like stone basement in July. It wraps around you gently, the kind of cool that makes you sigh and forget the heat clinging to your clothes. The walls are made from sarouj, a clever blend of mud, ash, goat hair, egg whites, lime, and sand. Not exactly something you'd eat for breakfast, but fantastic for insulation. This mixture is somehow both waterproof and breathable, like the ancient desert version of Gore-Tex. You might be wondering, why even bother? I mean, these folks didn't have ice cream or Pepsi to chill. But in a time before fans and refrigeration, ice was power. It was prestige. It was the difference between surviving the summer and baking in your own sweat. It was luxury, served in chilled rosewater drinks, stored for royal feasts, and even used to lower the fever of a very lucky patient. Even weirder, they didn't just store ice, they made it here too. Now, here's your first quirky fact of the night. Some of this ancient Persian ice was made on purpose, using shallow pools of water left to freeze under the open night sky. That's right. No magic, no fancy machines, just a calculated use of nighttime desert temperatures which could dip drastically even when the daytime heat was merciless. By morning, a delicate layer of ice had formed, thin but real. Ice sheets were gathered before dawn, gently broken, and then tucked deep into the yakhchāl like treasure. Historians still argue whether these ice-making systems were truly designed with full scientific intent or whether they were just lucky hacks that got refined over generations. After all, the builders didn't have thermometers or physics textbooks, but somehow they created structures that managed to balance heat, airflow, and humidity better than most modern basements.
You reach out and touch the wall. It's rough with straw fibers, but oddly smooth in places where centuries of human palms have passed.
A ghost of cool moisture clings to the surface. Overhead, the dome curves up toward a small hole at the top, a vent, not a flaw. It lets hot air rise and escape, pulling in cooler drafts through the lower slits. This quiet convection current hums even now, like a sleepy breath cycling through lungs made of mud and thyme. Outside, you hear the desert wind picking up. It whistles gently through the ruined channels and dry reeds. In its own soft way, it's part of the cooling system too. The ancient Persians harnessed every trick available, sun, wind, shadow, even the stars, to bend the climate just enough to preserve the prize. The yakhchāl itself is half above ground, half below. Step down a few worn, crumbling stairs, and you'll find yourself in the ice pit. It's deep, shaded, and still. The air is colder here, still holding on to the breath of long-gone winters. The pit once held tons of ice, carefully layered with straw or bark to stop it from fusing into a giant frozen pancake. Each summer, the ice would be chipped off as needed, delivered to homes, palaces, or market stalls by mule or camel. And yes, it's okay if you're picturing a desert camel hauling an ice cube like some ancient DoorDash driver. That mental image has helped lull many a sleepy historian to rest. Back above, the sun begins to drop behind the hills. The sky blurs from brass to rose to violet. It's the perfect time to start the next part of our walk, because tonight there's more than one way to cool a desert.
You step away from the yakhchāl as twilight settles in, the desert air softening by the minute. The ground still radiates heat like a slow cooker left on low, but the wind is shifting, just enough to raise a few loose grains of sand and carry with it the whisper of something ancient. Tonight, your journey isn't about conquering the desert. It's about understanding how a people thousands of years ago quietly learned to outsmart it. You head toward a nearby trench, long, shallow, and too intentional to be natural. It stretches out, disappearing into the horizon like a scar across the land. This is the top of a qanat, a silent marvel of ancient engineering that has carried water beneath the Iranian plateau for millennia. You wouldn't know it from just looking at it, but you're standing above a kind of underground aqueduct, one that once transformed barren deserts into fertile land. Qanats are humble but heroic. Imagine a sloping tunnel, dug by hand, that begins in the highlands where snowmelt gathers and gradually winds downhill using gravity alone to bring cool water into the heart of the desert. No pumps, no wires, just math, manpower, and a very long attention span. One qanat might run for 30, 40, even 70 kilometers, all underground, all carved from stubborn rock and soil with little more than chisels and baskets. As the stars begin to bloom overhead, you walk beside one of the vertical shafts that dot the qanat's surface, like air holes for a sleeping underground beast. These shafts allowed workers to climb down during maintenance or excavation, and they also helped ventilate the tunnels. Some are still open, others are capped with stones or forgotten beneath time. You lean over one carefully. It's deeper than it looks, a dark mouth whispering cold air from far below. The builders of these systems weren't casual weekend hobbyists. Qanats were the work of generations. Families passed down the secrets of construction, angle, and flow like heirlooms. If they got the slope wrong, too steep, and the water rushed out, eroding the walls. Too flat, and it stagnated. But when they got it right, magic. Well, hydrological magic.
Here's a strange little fact to chew on as your eyelids start to weigh. Some workers dug these channels while blindfolded. not for drama, but to avoid being disoriented in the pitch black. Others reportedly carried birds in cages to test air quality. If the bird fainted, it was time to back up. Charming, morbid, efficient. You sit by the edge of the channel and imagine it full. Cool water trickling quietly beneath your feet, hidden from the sun, but always moving. This was Persia's lifeblood, and not just for drinking. It watered gardens, filled public fountains, and yes, cooled the water basins used to make ice at night. Historians still debate just how widespread the use of qanats was in relation to ice production. Were they originally designed for agriculture and then repurposed to support refrigeration, or was water transport always entwined with the desert's desperate need for comfort? There's no conclusive answer, but the connection feels too elegant to ignore. The landscape around you starts to take shape in the moonlight. You see outlines of old orchards, date palms, and courtyards fed by the very system humming beneath your feet. This entire ecosystem was made possible by quiet, invisible water. And if you're wondering whether anyone's still digging qanats today, yes, actually. In parts of Iran, Afghanistan, and Oman, qanat building is still a living art, although it's endangered by concrete, electricity, and, let's be honest, modern impatience. There's even an old word for the master diggers, muqannīs. Try whispering that to yourself. It's like a breeze in the back of your throat.
You imagine being a muqanní, working barefoot in a tunnel barely wider than your shoulders, chipping away at earth while cold water laps at your ankles. Maybe you hum a song to keep time. Maybe you're just listening to the steady drip of water echoing in the dark. Either way, it's a far cry from your air-conditioned apartment, but also strangely peaceful. The wind picks up again, this time carrying the scent of dry herbs and clay. The stars are sharp tonight, crowding the sky like a spilled jar of sugar. You begin to realize something. All of this, qanats and yakhchāls and mud walls and snowmelt, isn't just clever engineering. It's an attitude, a way of living with the land rather than against it, of coaxing comfort out of hardship using patience and silence. You stretch out on a woven mat someone's left behind, your fingers grazing the cool surface. The earth under you is resting too, its secrets tucked beneath layers of sand and centuries. There's no roar of machines, no flashing lights, just the ancient sound of water moving slowly where no water should be. You listen. You breathe. You almost forget it's a miracle. And tomorrow, when the sun rises again, like a flaming orange on a griddle, this system will still be working. Invisible, reliable, boring, in the most beautifully brilliant way.
You're walking again, this time with the early light of dawn brushing across the desert floor in soft amber streaks. The coolness of night still lingers faintly in the air, like a forgotten dream slowly burning off. It's the perfect time to think about heat, or more precisely, how to beat it. You glance toward the yakhchāl in the distance. Its silhouette glows dimly in the morning light, casting long shadows across the brittle ground. As the sun begins its familiar, merciless climb, the world shifts. Birds do quiet. Surfaces warm up rapidly. And you're left pondering something most desert dwellers spent their entire lives thinking about: how not to overheat. Let's start with a sleepy little physics lesson. Heat rises. Cool air sinks. Water evaporates and carries heat away with it. That's all it takes. These aren't secrets. They're facts so basic you probably learned them when you were still eating paste and drawing lopsided suns in the corner of every school paper. But What the ancient Persians did, what makes them legendary in their quiet, understated way, is they took these basic truths and turned them into something profoundly livable. They figured out how to survive a 40 degrees Celsius summer without AC, fans, or lemon popsicles, and that deserves some kind of sleepy round of applause. You reach a shaded alcove formed by mud brick walls, once part of a merchant's house or roadside station, now crumbled and sun-bleached. Inside, the temperature drops dramatically, not because of magic, but because of design. Thick earthen walls, small windows, and a basic respect for shade can do wonders. They knew that blocking sunlight was better than trying to undo its damage. Want a strange detail? Some Persian homes were built with double roofs. A gap between layers allowed hot air to rise and escape before it baked the rooms below. These weren't elite luxuries. Even humble homes used tricks like covered courtyards, wet mats over open doorways, and porous jugs called zirs that naturally cooled water via evaporation. You crouch by one now, a forgotten jug half buried in the dirt. The clay feels rough, handmade. The opening is narrow, shaded. Inside, the water would have been cool. Not ice cold, but cooler than anything the sun had a say in. You imagine dipping your fingers in, sipping slowly, and exhaling like you've just found shade after a 5-day walk. Here's your fringe tidbit of this section. At night, some families would sleep on rooftops, not just for the stars, but because the breeze at that height, however faint, made a real difference. Whole cities turned their rooftops into open-air bedrooms, complete with rugs, cushions, and the occasional scolding grandmother reminding children not to roll off the edge in their sleep. And that brings us to one of Persia's most poetic contributions to staying cool: wind catchers, or badgirs, tall, narrow towers that rise like chimneys, but function in reverse. They capture even the slightest breath of wind and funnel it down into buildings. Inside, the air spreads slowly, gently, like a whisper down a hallway. Sometimes it flows over a basin of water for extra chill, before it drifts into rooms where people lie motionless, fanning themselves and dreaming of ice. Historians still argue whether wind catchers originated in Persia or Egypt. There's evidence on both sides. Maybe it doesn't matter. What does matter is that in the right hands and on the right buildings, badgirs could lower indoor temperatures by several degrees. No power source required, just height, airflow, and geometry. You tilt your head back and squint toward a crumbling badgir rising nearby. It's mostly intact, despite centuries of storms, earthquakes, and pigeons doing their best to disrespect it. The slats are angled just so, designed to catch winds from multiple directions. Inside, a simple partition system guides the air like a lazy river through the house. Imagine living inside that quiet draft, cooking slow stews while the breeze curls around your ankles, napping with fabric curtains fluttering beside you, reading poetry aloud while the walls hum with silence and stillness. It's a level of peace you don't often find in modern HVAC systems. One theory suggests that some of the ice-making basins were built alongside these wind towers, or even incorporated them directly, letting the breeze skim over shallow water, encouraging evaporation and maximizing nighttime cooling. Again, no blueprints survived to confirm this, but when you think about how everything else was interconnected, it's not a stretch. Persians weren't improvising in chaos. They were weaving one long strategy against heat. You run your hand along the wall's edge. It's dry, warm, but not scalding, thanks to shade, earth, and orientation. The structure faces north, away from the brutal southern sun. Little things, thoughtful things, things modern architecture sometimes forgets in its rush for glass and steel. So here you are, standing still, in a place designed to never feel rushed, a place where cooling off was a quiet ritual, not a noisy appliance, where the natural world wasn't an enemy to defeat, but a partner to coax. You listen again, for the breeze. It comes, eventually, not fast, not dramatic, but enough, just enough.
The sun is fully up now, crawling its golden fingers across the sand, peeling back the shadows like a sleepy child trying open the curtains. It's going to be a hot day, no surprises there. But you, lucky traveler, are about to witness something miraculous, the birth of a yakhchāl. No, not a single one, not a sudden pop of a mud dome springing from the earth like a mushroom. This isn't a cartoon. It's a slow, patient process, like everything else in ancient Persia, measured in months and seasons, not hours and deadlines. You've walked to the edge of a construction site, but it doesn't look like any modern build. There are no machines, no warning signs, no foremen yelling into radios. Just a group of men in loose robes and turbans, their feet powdered with clay dust, working in quiet rhythm. The smell of wet earth is thick in the air, and a low murmur of conversation rises like the call of bees from a hive. They're making sarouge, the ancient supermud we met earlier, a blend of things you'd never expect to go together. Mud, ash, lime, goat hair, and yes, egg whites. If you're picturing a baker's worst nightmare, you're not far off. But this strange concoction was waterproof, insulating, durable, and resistant to the intense desert sun. Builders would trample the ingredients together with their bare feet until it reached just the right consistency, thick enough to shape, sticky enough to hold, and humble enough to last centuries. The base of the yakhchāl is a wide circle, often 20 or 30 meters across. From here, the dome rises slowly, layer by layer, built in a conical shape that's not just beautiful, but functional. The slope allows snow melt to roll off, minimizes sun exposure, and improves airflow. Everything here has a purpose, even if it looks like the world's largest beehive made of mud.
And speaking of bees, one of the stranger little notes from a few scattered records suggests that some early builders mimicked the construction patterns of desert beehives, admiring their insulation and natural geometry. It's unconfirmed, of course, but doesn't it make you smile to think of an old Persian engineer watching bees for cooling tips? Inside, the space is vast, echoey, and wonderfully still. The walls are thick, sometimes over 2 meters at the base, and taper as they rise, giving the entire structure the feeling of a gentle earthen womb. The floor is dug out into a pit, sometimes lined with stone, sometimes with more packed sarouge. This is where the ice will live. This is its cradle. And if you think this whole process sounds straightforward, don't be fooled. Yakhchāl construction required timing, coordination, and a steady eye on the seasons. Build too late and you've missed your chance to store winter ice. Build too early and the summer heat would undo your work before the plaster set. Historians still argue whether the Persians always intended these structures for ice storage, or whether they evolved from grain silos, water tanks, or even tombs. The evidence is scattered, and few texts from the time survive. But one thing is clear: by the 5th century BCE, these domes were already a signature of Persian architecture. And here's your fringe tidbit for the evening. Some yakhchāls were built with underground escape tunnels, not for people, but for water. In the event of flooding or overflow, clever engineers created channels that would redirect meltwater away from the storage chamber and into qanats or fields, because nothing in the desert gets wasted, not even meltwater.
You watch as workers layer sarouge onto the rising walls, smoothing it carefully with wooden paddles. One older man pauses to hum a tune you can't quite place, something lilting, maybe a lullaby.
Another bends over a crack, mutters a curse, and immediately calls for a fresh mix of plaster. They're not in a hurry, but they're not wasting time either. They've done this before, many times. You get the sense they could do it with their eyes closed. Above you, scaffolding made from palm trunks and rope creaks as a boy climbs up with a water jug balanced on his shoulder. He grins at you as he passes, his feet bare, his hair damp with sweat. He's part of the system too. Everyone here is. When the dome is complete, they'll leave a small vent at the top, precisely placed to let rising warm air escape while holding the cool inside. It's a delicate balance. Too wide and heat gets in. Too narrow and the air stagnates. But they've mastered this. Trial and error over generations has honed it into art. You lean back on a sun-warmed rock, watching the dome take shape hour by quiet hour. No one rushes. No one panics. The desert isn't going anywhere. Neither is the heat. And somewhere deep inside this rising dome, a future block of ice is waiting to happen.
By now, the dome stands proudly, its surface drying in the heat like ancient bread left out too long. But don't let the humble look fool you. Inside that curved wall is the secret to an entire summer's worth of chilled relief. And what holds it all together? Not magic, not marble, just a frankly odd but genius recipe of mud, straw, lime, and goat hair. Yes, you read that right. Let's press in for a closer look at the wall recipe that makes the yakhchāl more than just a giant mud pie in the desert. The builders smear on a final coat of sarouj, that super mud we keep encountering. If the desert had a signature scent, it might be this: earthy, limey, faintly animal. The mixture is waterproof and breathable, like an ancient version of Gore-Tex, but made with barnyard ingredients. You expect a goat to come by and demand royalties. You run your hand along the curved surface. It's still a little damp. The texture is uneven, dotted with bits of hair and straw poking out like wild eyebrows. It feels organic, like it grew here instead of being built. The outer layers will dry and harden into a crust so tough it can withstand wind, heat, rain, assuming any ever arrives, and time itself. What makes sarouj special is not just its oddball composition, it's how it behaves. It doesn't crack like pure clay or erode like regular mud. Instead, it flexes ever so slightly, expanding and contracting with temperature changes. That's how yakhchāls avoided collapsing after a century of roasting sun and freezing desert nights. Fringe fact for your drowsy delight: sarouj was so impressive that it was later used in Persian baths, bridges, and aqueducts. And get this, some surviving bridges from 1,000 years ago are still standing because they were held together with this medieval mud glue. Not bad for something made with egg whites and goat hair. Inside the dome, the thermal insulation is even more important. You might think the thick walls are doing all the work, but no. It's also the material's ability to trap cool air and resist conduction. On a scorching 40 degrees Celsius day outside, the inside of the yakhchāl might hover around 10 degrees Celsius or less. Not quite Arctic, but plenty cold enough to keep ice from melting. It's the kind of cooling that doesn't slap you in the face. It just settles around your bones like a long sigh. Historians still argue about how exactly sarouj achieved its unique properties. Some believe the secret lies in the ratio of lime to ash. Others insist it's the presence of hair fibers acting like rebar in concrete. And of course, a few outliers argue that it's simply good fortune and smart maintenance. Either way, the formula worked, remarkably so.
You sit on the rim of the interior pit, imagining what it's like mid-July with the sun boiling overhead and traders arriving from far-off cities, desperate for something cool. The yakhchāl keeper would descend into the cool depths, chip away a block of ice, wrap it in straw, and send it up. Ice in the middle of the desert, hand-delivered like a precious gem.
And here's another quirky little truth. Some ice blocks were treated like royal goods. They were covered in blankets, tied with leather straps, and transported at dawn or dusk to avoid direct sunlight. Wealthy homes had their own small ice compartments. Poorer citizens might wait for market day to buy a few shaved chips tucked into a drink with rosewater or tamarind. But it all began here, with this dome, these strange walls, and a recipe so odd you can't help but love it. You lie back, staring up into the open vent above. A soft breeze brushes across your face, slipping down through the gap like it's been invited. You wonder how many thousands of breezes have passed through this very space. How many nights of still air and sweltering days, and yet the structure endures. The wall beside you hums with quiet history, not loudly, not boastfully, just existing, doing its job, keeping the cool inside and the heat out. You begin to understand the deep appeal of all this boring history. It's not boring at all. It's the kind of brilliance that sneaks up on you, the kind that doesn't shout, but lasts. And as you start to nod off again, nestled against this ancient cooling dome under a slowly warming sky, you can't help but think there's something deeply comforting about a civilization that once beat the desert using mud, hair, and the wind.
The sun is climbing higher now, curling its warm fingers around every dune and brick. But you're not done wandering yet. The yakhchāl stands silent behind you, cooling its shadowy interior like a patient sleeping giant. Now it's time to follow the real magic, how ice was made in this hot, dry, sun-drenched wilderness. It begins after sunset, when the heat releases its grip and the desert transforms from furnace to freezer. You walk through a wide, shallow basin next to the yakhchāl. Nothing fancy, just the low-walled rectangular pool carved into packed earth. It looks like someone started digging a swimming pool and then gave up halfway. But this humble pit is where the miracle begins. Here's the process. At night, water is poured into these shallow basins, maybe just a few centimeters deep. The desert, as it turns out, is a place of extremes. While the daytime might roast you alive, the nights, especially in winter, can dip well below freezing. This huge temperature swing becomes the secret weapon of ancient Persian ice farmers. Imagine it now, under a starlit sky, the desert wind slipping quietly across the basin's surface, the water slowly losing heat to the open air. The basin is oriented north-south, so the rising sun hits it as late as possible. The walls around it block any leftover warmth, especially if they're painted white to reflect moonlight and preserve the chill. You crouch at the edge and touch the packed mud, cool, dry, and perfect for freezing. Historians still argue whether this process, artificial freezing by radiative cooling, was truly understood by its creators or just stumbled upon by generations of observation. Did they know about thermal radiation? Unlikely. But did they figure out, year after year, that certain shapes, materials, and layouts made better ice? Absolutely. Sometimes knowledge comes not from books, but from stubborn practice. You picture the workers now, bundled in cloaks against the biting desert night, checking the basins by torchlight.
As the temperature drops, a thin sheet of ice begins to form on the surface. Not thick enough to skate on, but enough to matter. And this is where the work begins in earnest. At dawn, they rise early, very early, because the desert sun wastes no time. Using wooden tools or gloved hands, they gently break up the ice sheets and collect them into baskets, sometimes wrapped in straw or fabric to slow melting. The ice is then hauled, quietly, carefully, into the depths of the yakhchāl, where it will sit and dream through the hot months ahead. It's not a fast process. Some nights yield barely enough ice to fill a few jars, but over the course of many nights during the coldest parts of winter, the ice pit gradually fells, a layer at a time, a breath at a time, like tucking winter away, flake by flake, while no one is looking. Want a quirky detail to chew on as you get cozy again? There are records suggesting that some families took turns tending the freezing pools, almost like a sleepy neighborhood ice watch. It was considered both a duty and a small honor, staying up late, watching the stars, and making sure the ice didn't melt prematurely or crack too soon. You weren't just making ice, you were preserving comfort, health, even prestige. There's another clever trick they sometimes used, adding a thin layer of straw beneath the water in the basin. The straw provided insulation from the ground, encouraged uniform freezing, and made it easier to lift the ice sheet when morning came. Ancient Persian farmers, turns out, were also amateur physicists, or maybe just very, very good at trial and error.
The desert remains quiet while you picture this. All the invisible knowledge wrapped up in such a modest process. No engines, no buttons, no humming compressors, just air, mud, time, and temperature. You smile. You can't help it. Over in the distance, a camel groans, a long theatrical sound, like it's also impressed with this story. You consider thanking it for the support, but decide against talking to imaginary camels, at least not until after lunch. As the sun creeps higher, the pools dry out again, awaiting the next cold night. You glance back at the yakhchāl, now fully basked in light, and think of all the ice sitting inside, each piece a frozen sigh from the night before. And all of it, every drop, created under stars, in silence. The heat will come soon, and with it the thirsty crowds, the clinking cups of icy rosewater, and the careful rhythm of ancient delivery. But that's a chapter for later. For now, it's enough to know that in the driest of lands, the coolest of creations began every night, quietly, gently, beneath a dome of stars.
The sun is now well above the horizon, and the ground radiates with a quiet rising heat that presses into your sandals. Still, you follow a well-worn path leading away from the freezing basins in Yakhchāl Dome toward the people behind the operation. It's time to meet the unsung heroes of ancient Persian refrigeration, the ice farmers. That's not an official title, of course. They weren't called that, but it fits. These were the folks who, without fanfare, uniforms, or hashtags, labored through the coldest nights of the year to make ice in the desert. You might picture medieval villagers with pitchforks and torches, but these workers were more like sleepy scientists mixed with night shift gardeners, quiet, methodical, and deeply connected to the rhythm of the desert. You find them gathered around a low clay oven, eating a sparse breakfast of flatbread, dates, and strong, bitter tea. Their cloaks are layered, their beards are dusted with straw. Their fingers are red from cold, even though the day is already warming fast. One is sharpening a wooden tool used for lifting ice sheets. Another is adjusting the bindings on a basket woven from palm fronds. Everything is handmade, including their patience. Most of these men come from families who've worked the yakhchāl for generations. Skills passed from father to son, not through books but through observation. Through waking before the sunrise, hauling buckets of freezing water, and learning the precise moment when ice was ready to be harvested. Timing was everything. Here's your quirky tidbit for the day. It's said that some ice farmers could judge the quality of the ice by tapping it with a stick and listening to the sound it made. Clear and sharp meant pure, while dull and thuddy meant cracked or waterlogged. That's right, desert refrigeration by ear.
You sit beside them as they prepare for another night's work. There's no urgency, just a quiet acknowledgement of the cycle. Freeze, harvest, store, repeat. It's a rhythm as old as the land itself. They know the desert doesn't bend easily. It has to be coaxed, persuaded, maybe even tricked into surrendering a little winter to those who ask nicely. A younger boy, barely 10 maybe, brings out a shallow dish of leftover ice shards from the morning harvest. He offers you one with a grin. You press it to your cheek. It's melting fast, but for a few glorious seconds, you feel a perfect chill. A gift from the stars and the silence. The ice farmers aren't just laborers, they're caretakers of time and temperature. Every bucket poured into the freezing pool, every chip stored beneath straw, every cracked sheet examined before dawn, it's all done with care. Not for profit, not for pride, just to keep the yakhchāl full enough to serve the city in summer. And believe it or not, there was status in the job. In communities where comfort was rare and fleeting, the people who managed to conjure ice were treated with real respect. They might not have been nobles, but they were trusted. You don't let just anyone handle the precious melt-proof cargo meant for royal feasts and newborns with fevers.
Historians still debate whether these ice workers were full-time specialists or farmers doing seasonal shifts. Some records suggest ice work was a winter-only job. Once the pools stopped freezing, the workers returned to their farms. Others believed that large yakhchāl complexes had permanent caretakers, especially in cities where ice was in high demand. Like most things in the ancient world, the truth probably lives somewhere in between. As midday approaches, the workers retreat into shade, wrapping themselves in light fabrics and dozing under low awnings. They'll be back out again tonight, pacing the pools, checking for frost, whispering to the stars. For now, rest is part of the process. You lie back next to them, the smell of earth and smoke curling into your nostrils. Somewhere in the distance, a donkey brays like it's late for a meeting. Someone mutters a joke about spoiled ice. Another grunts and pulls a straw hat over his eyes. You watch as the sunlight filters through a thatched roof, making patterns on the ground like a lazy mosaic. The men doze. The baskets are ready. The pools will be waiting again tonight. And the ice? It will come. Quietly, reliably, one chilled breath at a time.
Afternoon heat presses down now, lazy but relentless, draping itself over rooftops, stone, and skin. Even the wind has surrendered. What little there was has curled up somewhere in the shade to nap. You follow the faint sound of footsteps and chatter into the heart of an old Persian town, the kind that would have relied heavily on its yakhchāl during the blistering months ahead. This isn't a city of palaces or towering monuments. It's a town of courtyards, awnings, and cool inner chambers, all woven together like a tightly knit quilt. The streets are narrow on purpose, built not just for defense, but for shade. By limiting how much direct sunlight reaches the ground, the town planners created something like a reverse oven. The air stays cooler longer. You can feel it in your bones. You stroll past an open courtyard. Inside, a family is gathered around a low table. A boy leans over a clay bowl, happily sipping from a drink laced with slivers of ice. The sound of the melting crystals is crisp, almost musical in the afternoon hush. You see the mother roll her eyes but smile as he crunches it loudly. A father lazily fans himself. A grandmother dozes beside a fountain. That ice came from the yakhchāl, of course, carried in the early morning by mule or foot, wrapped in straw or linen, and dropped off at homes like this one, carefully rationed, lovingly stored. This wasn't something you took for granted. You didn't fill a bathtub with ice cubes for fun. You used it sparingly to cool a drink, lower a fever, or line a dish of fruits for honored guests.
And here's a curious little footnote. Some households would even offer a chip of ice to a guest as a sign of honor, like tea in some cultures or wine in others. A piece of ice was a gift, cool, rare, refreshing, and impossibly precious. In the public markets, ice was sometimes sold in small chunks. Not everyone could afford it daily, but on festival days or in emergencies, it was worth the cost. Merchants would ring bells or call out in sing-song voices, advertising ice water sweetened with dates, or cool lemon sharbat half a coin. And people would gather with their own cups, palms open, eyes squinting against the heat. You pass a stall now, long abandoned, but still bearing traces of faded paint, a drawing of a palm tree, a half-erased price scrawled in Persian script. You can almost hear the old vendor shouting over the sound of donkeys and laughter, guarding his dwindling supply of chipped ice from the midday sun like a dragon guards gold. Historians still argue about how widely available ice really was in these desert towns. Was it something only the wealthy enjoyed regularly? Or did the clever network of yakhchāls and communal freezing pools make it more democratic? As always, the truth likely depended on location, season, and social class. But one thing is clear. Ice was never wasted. Every flake mattered. Meltwater was collected and reused. Melted ice was still cooler than anything left out in a jar all day. And during heat waves or illness, that coolness could mean the difference between comfort and collapse.
Want a quirky side note to sweeten your dreamscape? In some homes, they made a frozen dessert using snow, fruit juice, and rose water, like an ancient Persian snow cone. It wasn't for every day, it wasn't for everyone, but the idea that someone somewhere once stood in a courtyard mixing peach syrup with desert ice is just delightful. You duck into a stone bathhouse, empty now but still smelling faintly of steam and oil. Here, too, ice sometimes played a role. A quick shock after a hot soak, a cool rinse poured over shoulders, not luxurious exactly, just human, just beautiful. A way of reminding the body it didn't have to always suffer. As the town slowers around you, you walk through layers of shade and sun, watching how the buildings turned their backs to the light. Here, survival wasn't about dominance. It was about design, community, and patience, about knowing where to walk, when to rest, and how to find comfort in a land that rarely gave it freely. The town exhales. You do too. The ice is melting somewhere, slowly, sensibly, just as it always has. You've wandered deeper into the sleeping town, where shadows now stretch long, and the afternoon heat seems to hum in place, like a taut string waiting to snap. But here, in the far corner of the settlement, past dusty alleys and sun-bleached doorways, you find something unexpected. A garden. It's not lush in the way you might imagine a royal Persian garden, all marble fountains and trimmed hedges. This is a working desert garden, practical and peaceful, fed by water from a nearby Qanat. Trees are planted in sunken beds to shield their roots from evaporation. Vines creep along pergolas, casting striped shade over clay benches. And hidden in the back, beneath a canopy of fig leaves, sits an old ice chest. Not an electric cooler, but a deep stone-lined box carved directly into the ground. This is the domestic descendant of the great yakhchāl, smaller, simpler, but still smart. It's filled not with massive blocks of ice, but with shards and chunks collected from the main dome and rationed carefully. Here, in the middle of the desert, you discover a kind of personal freezer from 2,500 years ago. You run your fingers along the smooth inner walls of the chest. The stone is cool, the air inside noticeably fresher. Some families even line these pits with charcoal or straw, both excellent insulators. A flat stone slab rests nearby, once used as a lid. You lift it slightly. It's heavy, but designed to keep sunlight and warm air out. Smart. Everything here is always smarter than it looks.
Just beside the chest sits a large ceramic jar, still intact, the kind used for sharbat, a chilled sweet syrup diluted with water and sometimes spiced with herbs or citrus peel. You imagine it filled to the brim, condensation beading on the outside, as a family gathers with small cups in quiet anticipation. The moment when ice meets rosewater, that's not just refreshment, it's a reward. Here's your fringe fact. Some noble households even trained servants in the art of ice presentation. No kidding. It was considered a skill to know how to crack, shave, or chip the perfect amount of ice without wasting it. There were customs about when to serve it, what vessels to use, even how to garnish it with mint or dried fruit. In a place where coolness was rare, it was also theatrical. You settle on a low bench beneath the vines, watching as bees drift lazily from bloom to bloom. The air smells of warm earth and crushed herbs. Someone, somewhere, is baking flatbread, and the scent carries on the breeze like a forgotten story. The garden isn't just about function, it's philosophy made physical. In ancient Persia, gardens symbolized paradise, ordered, life-giving, and shaded. They were often divided into quadrants by water channels, representing the 4 rivers of Eden. Even the word paradise comes from the Old Persian peri-deza, meaning walled garden. So now you see, cooling wasn't just practical, it was poetic. Gardens and ice were part of the same ethos, crafting comfort in a place that offers none naturally, and doing it with elegance, restraint, and care. Historians still debate how widely these smaller cooling pits were used in homes. Were they a luxury or common across towns? Did poorer families share communal ones or improvise their own versions with clay and sand? Archaeology offers few firm answers, but the surviving examples, humble though they are, speak volumes.
And here's something sweet to ponder as your eyelids start to float. Ice was sometimes used to cool medicine. Yep, physicians stored herbal pastes or cooling poultices in ice pits to treat burns, heat stroke, or inflammation. Imagine the relief of a chilled compress on its sunburned back after walking across the dunes. That's not just ingenuity, it's mercy. The garden rustles softly. A bird chirps. A lizard scampers across the stone lip of the ice chest. Life here has learned to move slowly, to seek shade, to respect the rhythms of heat and cool. You lean back, arms stretched across the bench, feeling the stone beneath your palms. It's warm, but not scalding. The vines overhead shiver in a rare breeze. Somewhere behind you, a door creaks open, and a child laughs, bright and brief. And you realize this is the whole point of the yakhchāl, the qanat, the freezing basins and the mud domes. It's not about luxury, it's about possibility, about making comfort, not from excess, but from wisdom, about carving out peace in a place that forgets to offer it. And in this quiet garden, with its jars and stone and modest pet of ice, you feel it too.
Evening draws near. The town begins to stir again, gently shaking off the weight of heat like a dog shedding water. Somewhere, someone strikes a pot with a spoon. A vendor's bell rings faintly in the distance. You wander through the softening light toward the edge of the settlement, toward a marvel most people today would walk right past, the qanat system. If the yakhchāl is the heart of ancient Persian cooling, the qanats are the arteries, silent, dark, and essential. They were the life force of the desert, carrying water from distant mountain aquifers across miles of dry, cracked land, delivering it to where it was needed most: gardens, fields, bathhouses, and yes, even ice pits. You stand at the rim of what looks like a simple stone ring in the ground. But that hole is a vent shaft, part of an ancient qanat tunnel dug dozens of meters beneath your feet. If you listen carefully, you can hear it, the faint rhythmic sound of water flowing far below, like a subterranean lullaby, cool, constant, invisible. The idea is brilliantly simple and infuriatingly hard to pull off. A qanat starts with a deep mother well dug high up in the foothills where groundwater is closest to the surface. From there, workers excavate a gently sloping tunnel downhill, stretching for kilometers if necessary, maintaining a precise gradient, often 1 meter of drop per 1,000 meters of length. Too steep, and the water rushes too fast and erodes the tunnel. Too shallow, and it never arrives. The builders, called muqannīs, were part engineer, part miner, part magician. They worked by torchlight, digging for months or even years to connect the aquifer to the towns below. The vertical shafts you see were used to remove soil, ventilate the tunnel, and, once completed, offer access for maintenance, which, if you're brave, meant being lowered down by rope into a lightless, breathless world beneath the desert.
Here's your quirky tidbit. In some places, muqannīs would sing specific work chants in the tunnels to keep rhythm and coordinate digging across vast distances. Their voices would echo along the shaft, letting the team know how close or far they were from meeting in the middle. You lean over one shaft, cautious but curious. The air that rises is cool, like the sigh of a buried river. This isn't accidental. The depth of the qanat keeps its waters cold, and this coolness, when piped into buildings or run beneath storage pits, acts like natural refrigeration. In fact, some wealthier homes would construct small channels through their basements to let qanat water flow directly beneath their floors, cooling the space by several degrees. Historians still marvel at the consistency of these systems. Some qanats ran for over 50 kilometers, and unlike open canals, they didn't lose water to evaporation. It was genius in slow motion, silent, invisible, and uninterrupted. You trace the qanat's imagined path through the village in your mind. It weaves under alleyways, past the mosque, beneath the market stalls, before finally curving toward the yakhchāl. There, it empties into a catch basin, ready to fill the freezing pools each night. Not a drop wasted.
The relationship between qanats and yakhchāls was more than practical. It was symbolic. One pulled water from the earth, the other stored its frozen breath. Together they turned impossibility into routine. You could have ice cream in the desert, not because of magic, but because of math. Historians still argue over who invented the qanat system first. The Persians claim credit,
but versions exist in ancient Egypt and even Peru. Still, the Persian models were the most refined, and some remain in use to this day, thousands of years later, a testament to doing something right the first time. As the sun dips low, the last orange light catches on the stone rim of the shaft. You reach down, cup your hands near the opening, and feel that soft chill once more. It's not dramatic, just a whisper, but enough. You walk back toward town, tracing the path the water takes, beneath your feet, under gardens, into hidden chambers. The Qanat never shouts. It just does its work, unbothered by centuries, empires, or the internet. And somehow that makes it all the more impressive.
Night has returned to the desert, cool and quiet, painting the sand in long shadows and soft grays. The town settles again into hush, doors closed, lanterns glowing like low embers. But you're not sleeping just yet. Tonight, you're stepping into a place where coolness becomes celebration, the Persian Mahmouni, or evening gathering. You arrive through a narrow archway into a courtyard strung with soft lamps. The walls are high, guarding the space from the outside world. The sky is a velvet dome overhead, stars blooming like tiny ice crystals. A few cushions are scattered along a low stone bench, and in the center, a table bears its crown, a tall, sweating glass jug filled with iced sharbat. Sharbat, if you've never had the pleasure, is a drink of sweetened fruit syrup, usually mixed with water and sometimes herbs. But tonight's version is extraordinary. Tamarind and lime, chilled with ice flakes harvested just that morning from the yakhchāl. The host pours it into shallow clay cups, and the sound of the pour is like a river cooling your ears. The guests lean forward, smiling. They sip, then sigh. That is the sound of satisfaction. You sit among them, wrapped in a borrowed shawl. The air is cool, the kind of cool that feels earned. A girl plays a gentle rhythm on a hand drum. Someone recites a few lines of Hafez, the poet who spoke of gardens, stars, and wine, but who would surely have written odes to ice had he thought of it. The host, an older man with eyes like folded paper, tells the tale of how his father once gifted a block of ice to a visiting trader from the West. The trader, stunned, asked where it had come from. Was it brought in from the mountains? When the host's father explained how they'd made it, right there in the town, under moonlight, the trader reportedly declared it sorcery without flames.
Quirky fact time. Some travelers during the early modern era, particularly European merchants visiting Persia, recorded being served chilled drinks in the middle of summer, often unable to understand how such a thing was possible. Their journals are full of baffled admiration, sometimes hinting that the Persians had discovered secrets lost to the West. But it wasn't lost knowledge. It was simply persistence in a place where the odds were always against you. Tonight's gathering isn't ostentatious. There's no music blaring or banners unfurled. Just conversation, a few shared stories, and the miracle of ice in the desert. The kind of ice that takes no shortcuts, that arrives one flake at a time, that must be watched, guarded, lifted, wrapped, and praised. Historians still argue over the social role of ice in ancient Persia. Was it reserved for elites, or did it trickle down, cup by cup, into the hands of ordinary people? The truth, again, is shaded. In cities with large yakhchāls and organized distribution systems, it's likely more people than we expect had access, especially during festivals or as part of temple offerings.
In fact, there are scattered records of ice being included in royal gifts, sometimes carved into shapes, other times dyed with herbal pigments. A short-lived gift, perhaps, but no less impressive than gold, especially when it melted in your palm like a prayer. As the evening deepens, a cool breeze stirs the tablecloth. You lie back on the cushion and look upward. The stars haven't changed in 2,000 years. Neither has the longing for relief from heat, from thirst, from the endless pressing weight of the sun. You understand now why the yakhchāl is more than a structure. It's a kind of promise that even in the harshest places, gentleness can be carved out. A child runs past with a chipped bowl, chasing the last of the ice slivers. Somewhere nearby, water drips from a melting cup. The air smells of citrus, clay, and the hint of rose. Laughter drifts up, light and brief. And you, visitor, dreamer, accidental time traveler, settle into the kind of evening that doesn't need to be remembered tomorrow to matter tonight.
Morning returns, quiet and golden, with long shadows stretching like sleepy limbs across rooftops and dust-worn courtyards. You rise slowly, the scent of fresh bread and wood smoke drifting through the air like a breakfast lullaby. Today, your journey takes you to the ice delivery routes, the ancient highways of chill. The yakhchāl has done its work through the night, its curved walls cradling cold like a mother with a fevered child. The basins were tended, ice gathered before dawn, and now the precious cargo is ready to move. You watch as 2 donkeys are prepared, each fitted with a pannier, baskets lined with straw, shaded with cloth, and lightly dampened to keep the interior cool. A man adjusts the load carefully, no block too heavy, no curve of the ice left unprotected. He works with quiet efficiency, muttering to himself, occasionally humming what sounds like a counting rhyme. This isn't just a delivery, it's a dance between heat and haste. He sets off through the winding alleys of the town, leading his animals like a desert postman, delivering packaged fragments of winter. You follow, curious. The early sun reflects off the stone in soft pinks and ochres, and people begin emerging. Market vendors, water bearers, sleepy-eyed children. When they see the donkey baskets, they brighten. Ice is coming! He makes his first stop at a small bathhouse. The attendant greets him with a cloth over one shoulder and immediately reaches for a chipped copper coin. A block of ice wrapped in cloth is handed over with reverence. It will be used to cool rinsing water for guests who request it, or perhaps to soothe the fevered customer resting in the tepidarium. Coolness here is medicine.
Next, the delivery winds toward a wealthy merchant's home, where the gates are tall and the shade inside runs deep. A servant meets them at the door, bows, and takes 2 larger blocks inside. You catch a glimpse of a stone-lined pantry where they will be stored, insulated not with electricity or humming coils, but with straw, clay, and ancient know-how. Quirky fact incoming: some households in larger cities even had underground cooling rooms with stone steps leading down to small basins. These rooms stayed cool year-round, thanks to smart construction and, of course, regular ice deliveries. You could say they were the desert ancestors of the modern fridge. The Iceman, let's call him Davud, moves on without haste. He doesn't rush, because rushing breaks the ice. Literally. He knows the paths with the most shade, the buildings that cast long morning shadows, and the courtyards that offer a minute's rest. His route has likely been passed down like a recipe, each turn chosen not for speed, but for coolness. Historians still debate whether ice deliveries were organized by city officials or left to private enterprise. Some evidence points to guilds of yakhchāl workers and haulers who regulated pricing, delivery routes, and even taught newcomers how to pack ice for transport. In other areas, it may have been a more informal affair, with independent workers like Davoud serving clients on a word-of-mouth basis. Either way, this was serious work. The amount of melt loss was carefully tracked, and clients might pay by weight or block size, with prices varying by distance, season, and social standing. Ice was a commodity and a craft, both.
A little girl runs up to Davoud now, giggling and asking, "Is there any left for me?" He grins, digs into a pouch, and hands her a marble-sized chip wrapped in a fig leaf. She presses it to her cheek, then her neck, then pops it into her mouth with a delighted gasp. Her mother calls her back, and Davoud shrugs, as if to say, "What can you do?" That's the thing with ice. It melts, no matter how well you pack it. And yet, people did it every day. Hauled it, protected it, delivered it with care. Not because it lasted forever, but because it mattered while it did. You and Davoud part ways at the edge of the market. His donkeys are lighter now, the baskets almost empty. But his job isn't over. He'll return to the yakhchāl soon, refill, and head out before the sun is high enough to undo his morning's work. You turn back once, watching as his figure shrinks between sunlit walls. A man ferrying frozen breath across burning earth. No engine, no haste, just quiet trust in the old ways.
The market hums now, filled with color, sound, and the fragrance of spices mingling with warm bread and dusty air. You drift through it slowly, watching how ice quietly shapes daily life, even here, even now. Not center stage, never loud, but present, essential, like a secret woven into the rhythm of the town. Stalls line both sides of the street, fabric fluttering in soft wind, pomegranates stacked in pyramids, glass jars of honey catching sunlight. But over there, beneath a wide awning trimmed with blue tassels, you see something special. A vendor selling cool sweets, delicacies only made possible by ice. You approach. On the counter sit small dishes of falude, a treat made with thin vermicelli noodles soaked in a syrup of rose water and lime, then lightly chilled with shaved ice. You watch as the vendor lifts a scoop from a cloth-covered basin, flakes of ice dancing like glass snowflakes. He sprinkles the noodles with crushed pistachio and a tiny splash of sour cherry syrup. "First time?" he asks, handing you a bowl. You nod. You taste. And it's wonderful. Cold, sweet, fragrant. It sends a soft shiver through your teeth. Here's your quirky moment. Falude is one of the world's oldest frozen desserts, dating back possibly over 2,000 years, and it's still eaten today across Iran. It's a bridge from past to present, proof that when people first mastered ice, they didn't just preserve things, they celebrated. The vendor, seeing your wonder, chuckles. "You know, my grandfather stored his ice under his bed in summer, built a little chest, called it his winter box." He laughs, then turns to another customer. You savor your falude, spoon by slow spoon, as the crowd flows around you. From there, you wander through the market, noticing more signs of ice's quiet presence. A woman sells pickled vegetables, kept cool in jars nestled in damp cloth. A fishmonger splashes nult water over his trays of river-caught carp. A cafe offers cool rose tea, infused overnight, then served with one perfect chip of ice, thinned but not gone. This, you realize, is what the yakhchāl makes possible. Not just drinks or desserts, but a culture of coolness, rituals, comforts,
indulgences woven into the daily pattern of life. Ice here is not about convenience, it's about intention. Historians still argue how ice transformed ancient food markets. Some claim it allowed greater trade in perishables, dairy, meat, even fish from further regions. Others insist its influence was more modest, limited to elites or ceremonial uses. But standing here, you feel a different truth. Whether it changed the economy or just changed someone's day, ice had power. You pass a tea house with shaded tables, its floor tiled in intricate patterns of cobalt and sand. A young man balances a tray of glasses, each clinking with a tiny cube of ice. That sound, delicate and crystalline, is its own kind of music, a promise of something brief but good.
Back at the center of the market, a boy sits cross-legged behind a crate of herbs and spices, fanning himself with a palm leaf. When he sees you, he holds up a sprig of borage, a cooling herb often steeped in summer drinks. "Good with ice," he says. You nod. He grins. Quirky detail time again. In some parts of Persia, herbalists stored temperature-sensitive roots and pastes in many yakhchāl-like chambers beneath their shops. Tiny pits sealed with clay lids, lined with ash or charcoal. They weren't glamorous, but they worked. You stop at a stall selling fragrant syrups, basil seed, sour orange, mulberry. The vendor offers you a sample mixed with ice water. As you sip, she leans in and whispers like it's a secret. People think the ice is the luxury, but it's the pause, the cruel sip, the moment. She's right. And as the crowd swells, the light softens, and the day slides toward evening once more, you find a quiet corner of the square to sit. You breathe in the scents, cumin, rose, earth, and let your mind drift. Not every market needs neon signs or loudspeakers. Some offer instead the whisper of meltwater down a stone drain, the smile of someone tasting cold sweetness under a high sun, a cracked clay bowl full of winter in midsummer. The sky begins its slow fade into lavender and gold, and the sounds of the market mellow into background hums, the soft clink of closing stalls, the final haggling voices retreating into doorways, the shuffle of sandals on dust. You wander now into a quieter part of town, a scholar's quarter, they say, where homes lean inward and streets whisper with old ideas. Here, the buildings are taller, their windows shaded with lattice work. The air is still cool from the day's carefully orchestrated shade. You follow a stone path into a small courtyard where a low door opens to an unexpected sight: a library. It's not grand or heavy with marble, just a peaceful space, its walls lined with scrolls and parchment, where the air smells faintly of ink, sandalwood, and chilled water. And there, near the back wall, sits something curious: a shallow clay trough with a ceramic jug sitting inside, surrounded by slivers of ice, a gentle old form of climate control. The librarian, an older woman with silver at her temples and ink-stained fingers, smiles at your interest. "She's the one," she explains, tapping the side of a scroll. "The ink runs in heat, so we keep a few jugs like this. The melt cools the air, the jug cools the parchment. It's both poetic and practical. This is how knowledge was protected from the desert, not just with stone or fireproof scrolls, but with ice.
cold enough to steady hands and preserve ink, quiet enough not to disturb thought.
She gestures toward a scroll. You unroll it gently. Inside, a diagram of a yakhchāl system sketched in looping Persian script and precise lines. Elevations, gradients, wind catchers. Notes in the margins referencing stars, seasonal cycles, wind directions, and strange constellations named for birds. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some yakhchāl builders consulted astronomers and engineers before placing a dome. They needed precise orientation to maximize shade and minimize solar exposure. A structure facing the wrong way could ruin months of ice in days. So yes, cooling in ancient Persia, it was a cosmic endeavor. Historians still discuss how widespread this academic involvement was. Were scholars truly engineers? Were engineers fluent in the stars? Or was it just the occasional wise crossover? Regardless, the evidence suggests that science and cooling were deeply intertwined, and nowhere more so than in cities where libraries, bathhouses, and yakhchāls sat within a few blocks of each other. You sit now at a low table, the cool jug beside you gently sweating. A student enters, breathless, and offers the librarian a tiny bundle, a dried herb wrapped in cloth. "For the ink," he says. She nods, tucks it away, and begins preparing a small ink pot cooled with ice water, mixing powder and melt in practiced rhythm. And suddenly, you notice. It's quiet. Not just peaceful, but acoustically cooled. The thick walls muffle sound. The stone floors seem to hold the day's final chill. There is no glass, no buzzing, only the scratch of a reed pen, the occasional drip, the deep inhale of a mind at work. You wonder now if great Persian poems were written with cool fingers on warm evenings, the verses made crisper by the room's temperature. Did the cool jug beside a poet's knee help shape a stanza that's still read today? Outside, night gathers its stars again. But inside the library, time seems slower, gentler. You curl against a cushion, scroll in your lap, and listen to the librarian speak softly to her apprentice about cool rooms, candle wax, and how to measure air with the back of your hand. No machines, no hums, just tradition, geometry, and care. You thank her, gently placing the scroll back on its shelf. Before you leave, she places a chilled fig in your hand, plucked from a tree in the courtyard, cooled in a stone bowl, a tiny farewell. You step back into the narrow street, the library door closing with a soft click behind you. Above, the stars stretch in patterns older than kings. You walk slowly, the fig still cool in your palm. Some places sharpen the mind with noise and urgency, others with shade and quiet, and the right amount of ice.
The streets are darker now, but not empty. In the cool hush of night, life gently resumes, nocturnal and slow, like the desert itself. You pass soft pools of lamplight cast from open windows, voices low, footsteps softer still. The heat has retreated. This is the hour when people breathe again. You're drawn to a faint rhythm, the sound of water, trickling and steady. Following it, you arrive at a public fountain fed by a qanat. It sits beneath a small stone arch, tiled in glimmering turquoise and deep blue. The air here is noticeably cooler, the ground damp, the scent of fresh water curling up around you like a shawl. A group of children sits nearby, legs dangling into the shallow basin. One of them playfully splashes another with meltwater, and a tiny scream pierces the calm before dissolving into laughter. Someone's brought a single sliver of ice from the yakhchāl. Precious, probably begged from an older sibling, and it's floating like a miniature glacier, the center of their game. They pass it from hand to hand like a jewel. One child dares to lick it, then recoils with a squeal. The others cheer. It's simple joy, ancient and repeatable. In places like this, the yakhchāl's effects extended beyond storage and supply. They reach into culture, into how people moved, played, and gathered. You see now that the structure wasn't just a technological marvel. It was part of daily rhythm, the quiet architect of comfort and community.
A young woman approaches the fountain with a wide ceramic bowl. She kneels beside the basin and begins to mix ingredients by hand. Rose water, lemon juice, a pinch of dried mint, and what looks like grated cucumber. She adds a few slivers of ice from a wrapped bundle at her side, carefully preserved. She glances at you. "For my father," she says simply. "He cannot sleep in this heat." You smile. You know the feeling. And here's your quirky note of the night. Some people made cooling compresses using ice chips and muslin cloth soaked in herbal infusions and applied to the forehead, neck, or chest. These were part of ancient Persian medical practices, especially to combat sleeplessness, fevers, or exhaustion. The blend of cold and herbal scent created a sense of calm, like an ancient, fragrant ice pack with spa-level vibes. Historians still piece together the full extent of these uses. Was it folk remedy or structured medicine? The records are scattered, but suggest a long-standing belief in thermal balance, where too much heat had to be countered with calculated coolness, not just in food, but in bathing, sleeping, and dreaming. You watch the woman walk away, bowl in hand. She disappears behind a carved wooden door, and you're left again with the sound of trickling water. A few older men arrive and settle near the fountain. One begins a quiet story, something about a fox and a farmer's cart. The others chuckle. One passes around a stone cup filled with a cooling drink, each man taking a small sip before passing it on. The stars above blink steadily, and a breeze teases through the alley, gentle and rare. You lie back on a smooth patch of stone near the basin. It's cool from the water, and the hum of life here is sleep-inducing. The occasional splash, the low lull of conversation, the scent of wet clay and rose petals drifting by. You close your eyes, and the thought surfaces, how the desert never really gives you cold, not freely. You have to trick it, wait it out, learn its rhythms, build domes and dig tunnels and gather freezing air one long winter night at a time. But when you succeed, when you touch that icy shard in the middle of the fire, it's worth everything. The children are gone now. The fountain still flows, and the yakhchāl, somewhere in the distance, rests quietly beneath the moon, full-bellied and still doing its job. The wind has shifted again, barely, but enough to notice. It moves along the walls, catching on latticework, and dips into shaded courtyards. And you, rising slowly from your spot near the fountain, feel that same whisper pulling you to a different part of the town, toward a building where the cool meets the sacred. You find it not by sign, but by feel. The walls are thick, the doorway low, the windows few. Inside,
Soft light filters through carved screens, painting patterns across a stone floor. This is a Persian bathhouse, or hammam. And though the fires in the furnace room have long gone cold, tonight it offers something different. Cool baths, still and silent. The attendant greets you with a nod, gesturing toward a changing space. You step inside, trade your dusty cloak for a loosely wrapped towel, and follow the sound of water into the main chamber. It is dark and beautiful. Vaulted ceilings, domes above pierced with tiny star-shaped holes that glow faintly from moonlight. A pool sits at the center, filled with cool qanat-fed water, surrounded by benches of polished stone. A jug of meltwater rests nearby, beads of condensation tracing paths down its sides. You wade in. The temperature is perfect. Not freezing, not tepid, just enough to cool your skin and settle your bones. You float briefly, weightless, before settling against a step. The air is still, the water whispers against the walls. And then, a faint drip. Somewhere behind you, a hidden recess drips chilled water into a basin, collected earlier, carefully stored. This room, in summer, is a sanctuary not from cold, but from the kind of heat that never ends.
Here's your quirky note. In several Persian cities, bathhouses had dedicated cooling chambers or even subterranean ice rooms where ice deliveries were stored for special clients. Wealthy patrons might request chilled rinses or frozen towels in the hotter months. It wasn't just cleansing, it was ceremony. A quiet voice breaks the silence. Another guest has entered, a traveler like you. He greets you softly and sits nearby, letting his hands drift across the water's surface. They say the Shah once bathed in snow, carried from the mountains in casks, for weddings, for curses. Depends who you ask. Historians still argue whether these snow baths were myth or extravagance. Some records hint at ceremonies where snow or ice played symbolic roles, cleansing, purifying, or simply displaying power. If true, they suggest an early understanding of temperature as spectacle. In this quiet room, though, no spectacle is needed. Just breath, water, and stillness. You trace the edge of the pool with your fingertips. The tiles are old, some chipped, others smoothed to a polish by thousands of years of footsteps and silence. The air smells of mint and stone. In a corner, a jug of cool rose water rests beside a bowl. You help yourself, splashing a little across your face and chest. The sensation is near bliss, calming, invigorating, precise. A man across the pool mutters a prayer under his breath, then dips beneath the surface.
And for a moment, it feels like you're inside the yakhchāl itself, wrapped in thick walls, surrounded by quiet curves, kept safe from the heat just outside. The design is the same. Domed ceiling, thick walls, silence within. Only here, the ice is people-shaped, cooling bodies, calming minds. You linger a little longer than necessary, as the echoes of water and footsteps stretch like shadows. Then, reluctantly, you step out, wrapping yourself again, water dripping from your hair and arms. The attendant hands you a cloth, damp and cool. In the dressing space, a tiny alcove holds a basin of chilled oil, used to soothe sunburns or soften dry skin. Another small victory of coolness over heat. You leave the bathhouse with your limbs loose, skin tingling. The streets are nearly empty now, but the town feels alive in its hush. A cat darts past. A lantern swings.
Somewhere, faintly, someone hums. And behind you, in that domed chamber, the cool water waits for its next visitor. The legacy of ice, stone, and water, never wasted, always shared.
You step softly through the deepening night, each stone beneath your feet still warm from the day, but cooling fast. The air carries a different texture now, drier, hushed, wrapped in quiet expectation. Somewhere the town exhales, and ahead you catch sight of it again. The yakhchāl. It sits on the edge of town like a sleeping sentinel. Domed and enormous, its surface gleaming faintly under moonlight. You hadn't expected to return so soon, but something about it calls you back, like a fireplace pulls you in during winter, except in reverse. As you draw closer, you see movement. Slow, purposeful. A night crew. This is one of the secrets to its magic. It doesn't rest. When the stars are bright and the winds are favorable, the yakhchāl comes alive with quiet activity. A team of workers, dressed in light layers and wrapped in headcloths, are preparing the ice basins again. One kneels beside a shallow trench, clearing away dust and smoothing the surface. Another carries a small jug of water, pouring it slowly, precisely, not too much, not too fast. They work without talking, each knowing their role. The rhythm of it is practiced as breath. You keep to the shadows, watching. There's no fire, no shouting, just the soft lap of water, the shush of sand underfoot, and the whisper of wind moving across brick.
The water begins to freeze quickly now. Not instantly, of course. It's not magic. But the conditions are just right. The air is dry, the ground radiates cold absorbed during the previous night, and the sky is clear. All of it adds up to a natural freezer, activated by care and timing. Here's your quirky tidbit for the night. In some parts of Persia, ice was also created in specially constructed freezing gardens, with sunken channels and low walls designed to funnel the cold night air. Even the color of the walls mattered, lighter tones to reflect daytime heat, darker ones to encourage nighttime chill. Historians still debate how scientific these designs truly were. Did ancient builders experiment with materials intentionally, or were they simply refining what worked? Some believe there was a folk science at play. Trial, error, observation, and oral knowledge passed across generations, all wrapped in the language of poetry and stone. A man spreads a thin layer of straw across the surface of one basin, not to insulate it fully, but just enough to protect from wind disruption. He adjusts it with care, like tucking in a child. Another worker brushes dust from the lip of a funnel-like channel that feeds the inner dome.
You glance toward the main chamber's entrance, a shadowy archway that leads down into the earth. It's sealed now, but behind that wall, ice sleeps, stashed in thick wedges, packed and wrapped, waiting for the weeks ahead. Some of that ice might be used in days. Some might not see sunlight for months. And they do it all again, every night. When the stars shine just right and the wind behaves, they add a little more to the dome's belly. Not for glory, not for gold, but so someone, somewhere, can have a chilled drink, or a fever reliever, or a bite of falud in summer. You sit quietly on a low wall at the edge of the site, your breath fogging faintly now. One of the crew members notices you, nods once, and keeps working. No one chases you off. You're a guest of the yakhchāl now, and here silence is respect.
time slows again. The basins shimmer with silver reflections. A stray dog curls near a wall, tail twitching in sleep. Above, the stars seemed closer than ever, and beneath them, in this pocket of cold, crafted by calloused hands and patient hearts, you feel something rare. Peace. Not dramatic, not loud, just earned stillness, one basin at a time.
The stars overhead are beginning their slow arc westward, and the night air has thinned, crisp, almost brittle, like it could break if you breathed too sharply. You stay a while longer near the yakhchāl, watching the workers complete their final adjustments. One of them carries a bundle of woven reeds, which he unrolls to cover the water surface. Another checks the shadow lines on the walls. Their movements suggest both habit and reverence, like they're not just building cold, but tending a sacred clock. You rise and step quietly away, letting the gentle hush fold behind you. Your path now curves toward a hill above the city, where the yakhchāl can still be seen, glowing faintly in the moonlight like an overturned pearl. But now you see something else in the distance. Ruins. Stone foundations, fragments of walls, half a pillar here, a tumbled lintel there. The remnants of a far older settlement, long abandoned, worn smooth by centuries of wind and forgetting. The kind of place history leaves breadcrumb clues in, hoping someone curious might come looking. You wander through what remains. No fences, no signs, just low walls and broken stone tracing what once may have been homes, workshops, or perhaps a tiny shrine. There's a worn-out channel carved into the rock, almost invisible. But when you crouch to examine it, you see the curve was clearly meant to carry water. Maybe part of an old Qanat system. Maybe even a precursor to a yakhchāl.
Here's your quirky thought. Some archaeologists speculate that yakhchāls may have evolved not as a sudden invention, but from older seasonal water storage pits, where early communities noticed that careful shading and smart alignment allowed ice to last just a little longer than expected. Over generations, those pits were deepened, domed, and refined. Cold turned from luck into science. Historians still puzzle over the origin date of the first true yakhchāls. Some claim evidence from 400 BCE. Others insist the technology took proper form only in the Sassanid period. But what's more interesting is how the idea spread. Not quickly, but steadily, town by town, dome by dome, until cold became portable wisdom. You sit now on a crumpled block that might once have been someone's doorstep. The view from here is beautiful. Rooftops sleeping under starlight, the faint outline of the desert beyond, and there, steady, whole, the yakhchāl standing like a memory that refuses to fade. And it strikes you. This structure you've been following, this cone of mud brick and breathless ingenuity, isn't really about storing ice.
It's about refusing to surrender to heat, about building the improbable, one wall, one basin, one grain of sand at a time. And perhaps that's why it endured, not because it was perfect, but because it worked with nature, not against it. It listened to wind, respected shade, honored time. As you begin your walk back down the hill, the ruins behind you settle into quiet again, content with their watching. Back on the road, the sky begins to tint just slightly, a hint of rose along the horizon. It's not morning yet, but the night is preparing to leave. A breeze stirs the trees near the city wall. Somewhere a rooster misjudges the hour and crows once, confused and early. You pass a house with a deep courtyard, its door ajar. Inside,
A woman moves like a shadow, placing a covered bowl into a stone-lined recess, preserving something, perhaps. A recipe, a memory. A chilled offering for the next day's heat. And in that moment, you understand the yakhchāl, not as a building, but as a philosophy. A soft rebellion against an unforgiving sun. A reminder that with patience and planning, even the desert can give up its fire. At least for a while.
The sky lightens slowly now, a dusty pink bleeding into the navy edge of night. You walk through the outer edges of the town where the desert begins to take over again, where homes grow sparser, paths less clear, and the wind starts speaking in longer sentences. Your destination this time is not stone, or domes, or cooling basins. It's a person, a storyteller, they say, who knows the yakhchāl better than any map, any scroll, any blueprint. And as luck, or perhaps fate, would have it, she lives in a house built into the shadow of the first yakhchāl ever raised in this valley. You find the place half buried in date palms, vines creeping over the mud brick walls. There's a low bench at the front, and seated on it is the woman herself shelling pistachios into a clay bowl. Her eyes, sharp and unreadable, flick toward you as you approach. "You're late," she says, not unkindly. But the yakhchāl never minds visitors. You sit beside her. The air is cool here, unnaturally so. The wall behind you hums with the echo of chill. She offers you a pistachio. You want stories or truths? You nod, unsure which she'll give you. She begins. This one was built by a man named Rostam, not the hero in the poems, just a man, a baker, tired of losing his ingredients to heat. He watched how wind moved, dug pits, sat up at night with the stars. He figured it out.
A baker built the first yakhchāl? You blink. That's unexpected.
Of course, she shrugs. Others helped. A nason who owed him a favor, a widow who lent her courtyard, a boy who brought salt from the flats. These things aren't built by geniuses. They're built by the tired, the clever, and the desperate. You chuckle softly. She doesn't. Quirky detail for you. There are oral traditions in certain Persian villages that claim ice domes began as community cookhouses, gradually repurposed as villagers noticed which pits held cold longest. There is no blueprint of that transformation, only stories like hers, traded like family recipes. She stands suddenly, stretching her arms overhead. "Come," she says, and leads you behind the house where a shallow entrance descends into the earth. You hesitate only for a moment before following. The staircase curves gently downward, the air shifting with every step, cooler, drier, hushed. You reach the underground chamber where the temperature is at least 15 degrees cooler than outside. Your breath curls slightly in front of you. This, she says, arms wide, was once a cold kitchen, then a storehouse, then a shrine, and now, she grins, a memory, but a useful one. The chamber is lined with smooth mud brick, cool to the touch. Ancient jars sit against the far wall, glazed, cracked, some still faintly smelling of dates, rosewater, and dried citrus. Overhead, a tiny shaft lets in just enough light to shape the space without warming it. You don't need fire to build something great, she says. Sometimes you just need to know when to wait and when to cover the pot. Historians still debate how many of these hybrid structures existed. Half storage, half ritual, half kitchen, half shrine. The boundaries blur in oral accounts, especially in rural regions. Some scholars scoff, others listen.
You stand there a while, letting the silence work its way into your bones. Then she claps her hands once gently. Enough cold. Let's not be greedy. Back above ground, the first light of the sun grazes the dome's curve, setting it aglow like a golden egg buried halfway in the sand. The woman returns to her pistachios. You'll forget my name, but you'll remember how it felt in there. That's how these things work. And she's right, because it didn't feel like a ruin. It felt like a secret still doing its job, long after its builders were dust.
The sun is finally cresting the eastern hills, its light spreading in slow ribbons across the rooftops, courtyards, and domes of the town below. You stand just outside the storyteller's home now, her words still lingering like a spice on the tongue, warm, strange, unforgettable. The yakhchāl casts a long, cool shadow behind you, and as the day begins its steady climb toward heat, you decide to follow the path the ice once took beyond the city, into trade routes, diplomacy, and empire. It starts humbly, of course, a narrow trail heading east, lined with wind-worn markers. You walk in silence at first, letting the heat gather slowly around your ankles. The road curves into a small valley where the ground flattens, and the remains of an ancient caravanserai stand half buried in yellow stone and time. Inside its broken walls, you can still picture the scene. Camels kneeling, merchants haggling, clay jugs thudding to the ground. And there, in the corner, a deep-walled pit lined with ash and wool. A traveling yakhchāl of sorts. Not everyone had access to the grand domes back home. So, on the road, traders improvised. They carried small clay vessels packed with crushed ice, transported in insulated crates lined with straw, salt, or even camel dung. Quirky? Very. But effective. You crouch near the edge of the pit. It still smells faintly of dust and oil. You imagine someone dipping their hands into it, pulling out a chilled bottle of sherbet syrup, offering it to a passing noble or a parched traveler.
And here's your fun fringe fact. Records suggest that during some royal Persian campaigns, ice caravans traveled with the army, delivering cold compresses and luxury drinks even during battles. Some scholars argue these stories were propaganda, ways to display the Shah's might. Others insist the engineering and planning were too consistent to be fiction. You walk now through the caravanserai's shadow and out the other side, into a stretch of path still bearing the worn grooves of carts. The wind has picked up slightly, blowing westward, and with it comes the scent of sun-warmed herbs and travel dust. As you crest a small rise, you spot what looks like an abandoned watchtower, but inside it holds a different surprise, a hidden cistern, sunken and lined with dark basalt. Not for drinking, too brackish, but used to cool clay jars through evaporation. Some say traveling cooks or healers used it to store potions or prepare cool salves for sore feet and sunburn. A handful of traders' marks have been carved into the stone walls. One, faint and rounded, resembles a small spiral cone. Could be graffiti, could be a tribute to the yakhchāl.
You rest briefly in its shade, tracing your fingers over the warm stone, imagining a younger version of this trade route. Lines of animals, spices, fabrics, and yes, ice, moving across mountains and valleys, linking palaces and marketplaces through shared cravings for cool. You recall a tale, half rumor, half legend, about a diplomatic gift, a bowl of ice cream sent across the desert, still cold upon arrival, flavored with saffron and fig. Historians scoff, but some trade logs record payments for cooling powders and wrapped vessels of night ice. Could they have pulled it off? Maybe. They had the tools, the know-how, the patience, and the desert, while harsh, doesn't mind cleverness. You press on, finally turning back as the road stretches too far. The town below is brighter now, whitewashed walls gleaming in the early light. And nestled like a sleeping animal at its edge, the yakhchāl, still catching shadows, still holding cold. And as you make your way homeward, you think not just of the ice it stores, but the places it helped reach, the palaces it cooled, and the strangers it connected, one chilled cup at a time.
The morning has matured now, full and golden, as you return through the gates of the town. Merchants are already arranging their wares, brushing dust from produce, hanging cloths against the rising sun. The streets pulse again, not bustling, just awakening, with that slow, purposeful energy unique to desert cities. But this time, your path doesn't bend toward the market or the yakhchāl. Instead, it leads toward a quieter neighborhood, where narrow alleyways twist like calligraphy, and houses lean close, whispering secrets across the gaps. You've heard of a man here, a craftsman well into his 60s, who's made a reputation in the art of ice tools. Clay vessels, woven covers, insulated boxes. His courtyard doubles as a workshop, and as you enter, you're greeted by the clinking of terracotta lids and the dry scritch of reed brushes smoothing clay. He doesn't look up when you arrive, just gestures to a shaded bench and mutters, "Watch the cat." There is indeed a cat, sleek and disinterested, lounging precisely where you were about to sit. You pivot to a lower wall instead. Around you, the workshop is an orchestra of function and improvisation. Ice urns with double walls, clay cups with small ribs inside to slow meltwater, even earthen funnels lined with charcoal. He's taken the principles of the yakhchāl and turned them into kitchen-sized miracles. Most people want cold, but they don't want to do the waiting part. They forget cold is slow.
You nod. He nods back. Transaction complete. Quirky tidbit? In some towns, pottery guilds were trained in thermal management, not just shape and glaze, but how to make a jug that kept butter solid in August. Some added powdered quartz to their clay for better insulation. Others used goat hair-lined baskets for travel storage. Not beautiful, perhaps, but brilliant. He hands you a small object, a clay disc the size of a saucer, ridged on one side. "For your forehead," he says. "Dunk it in ice water. Lay it flat. You will sleep like a goat on top of a mountaintop." You thank him, genuinely. Historians still argue whether these household cooling tools were luxury or necessity. Most evidence suggests both. Wealthier homes may have had ornate vessels with intricate glazes, poorer ones simple jars kept in the coolest part of the home, but all shared a common goal, outsmarting the sun. You glance toward the far end of the courtyard, where a low stone alcove sits in the shade. It's a miniature yakhchāl of sorts, just a meter tall, conical, with a narrow spout for runoff. For fruit, he explains, and herbs, the ones that hate light. Inside, you glimpse a bowl of fresh basil, still perky, a tray of dried apricots, slightly cool to the touch, a cup of rose vinegar, sealed tight, all tucked in, resting until someone needs their flavor or their calm. He shrugs. The dome doesn't have to be big, just has to be clever. And that's the heart of it, really. The grand yakhchāl gets the attention, but its legacy lives in small, repeated acts of preservation. In the home, on the road, in the hand. As you prepare to leave, the craftsman stops you. Wait. He disappears briefly, then returns with a small packet, wrapped in cloth and sealed with string.
Ice salt, he says. Not for eating, for remembering. You take it. Back in the street, the air feels a touch warmer now. But you don't mind. You've seen the tools, heard the stories, held the cleverness in your palm. And somewhere behind you, a cat flicks its tail once, unimpressed, as the sound of clay on clay resumes its sleepy rhythm.
You wander now through the older quarter of town, its walls bowed from age, its stones patched with generations of care. The alleyways are narrower here, and many homes are partly sunken into the earth, a quiet adaptation that speaks volumes. It's cooler here, instinctively so. The kind of place you imagine cold air lingers just a little longer before giving way to day's heat. You trail your fingers along the shaded brick as you walk, and the surface is still cool from the night, like a memory trying to hang on. A child darts past you, barefoot, carrying a tray covered with linen. You glimpse something glistening underneath. Ice, maybe? A sweet? You follow from a polite distance and watch him disappear into a house with a colorful door and a garden just visible beyond the arch. And in that garden, you hear it. A soft clink, the unmistakable sound of glass tapping glass, followed by laughter. You step closer and are met with the scent of rose, citrus, and mint. This, it turns out, is the home of a traditional syrup maker. Inside the courtyard, 3 generations are gathered around a low stone table, assembling something that gleams in the morning sun. Veloute, a beloved Persian dessert of vermicelli-like starch threads nestled in a chilled syrup bath. But today's batch is special. The syrup is steeped with saffron and cardamom, and the ice used to chill it was brought, yes, you guessed it, from the yakhchāl just before sunrise. One of the women catches your eye and waves you over. Taste, she insists, and you're handed a delicate bowl, the sides sweating gently. The first spoonful is cold, floral, sweet, a reminder that the yakhchāl didn't just preserve food, it preserved joy. Quirky detail of the day, in some villages, ice was rationed for desserts on religious holidays or weddings, often wrapped in fig leaves or padded with rose petals to prevent melting. Some texts even describe ice cakes flavored with honey and crushed nuts, served in palm leaf dishes during summer feasts. You sit beneath a fig tree and listen to their banter, half in Persian, half in teasing glances. A boy drops a bit of ice onto the stones and it cracks into shards. The youngest girl tries to collect them with a spoon. One elder begins to tell a story about how her own grandmother used to whisper into the yakhchāl before each new season, asking it kindly to stay strong and cold, especially before a wedding or a birth. She says, not prayer exactly, just cooperation. Historians still argue whether this was superstition, ceremony, or simply poetic habit, but the line between ritual and routine blurs easily in communities where cold was as rare as gold.
You finish your bowl and thank them, setting it gently on the stone table. The child who carried the tray earlier is now asleep on a cushion in the shade, his work done for the day. As you leave, one of the women presses a glass jar of syrup into your hands, cool from resting beside an ice basin. "You'll want this later," she says. "Trust me." You believe her. You step back into the alley, the taste still on your tongue, the cool lingering in your palm. Behind you, laughter continues. Someone begins humming a tune from an old lullaby.
Someone else fans the air with a folded bit of parchment. And again, you're struck by the brilliance of it all. How a structure meant to store winter's breath could ripple outward, touching everything from dessert to song to superstition. This is what cold does when given space and story. It soothes, it sweetens, it becomes part of the rhythm.
The sun is now fully awake, and the shadows have retreated into corners and under awnings. Yet you hardly notice the heat, not because it isn't there, but because you're tuned to its counterpoint. Every breeze, every shaded stone, every bead of condensation on a clay jug now feels like a small rebellion against the sun. And that rebellion takes you next to a place few outsiders visit, the herbalist's courtyard, a low-walled compound tucked behind a crumbling arch draped in grapevines. Inside, a wide bench is covered with bundles of herbs, drying flowers, and bowls of finely ground powders. The scent is dizzying. Mint, myrtle, fenugreek, dried rose, turmeric, and something faintly like camphor. You're greeted not by the herbalist herself, but by her apprentice, a boy with inky fingers and an air of practiced indifference. "She's in the cool room," he says, gesturing to a low door. The cool room turns out to be a cellar-like chamber, half dug into the earth, its air as crisp as any cave. Here, precious ingredients are stored, not just because they're rare or expensive, but because their potency depends on being kept cool. Certain roots spoil in heat. Some petals wilt. Others grow bitter under too much sun. The herbalist, a wiry woman with shark eyes and a headscarf streaked with powder, barely glances at you as she moves between jars. Too many people think ice is only for comfort, but cold has its own medicine. She points out a sealed urn filled with infused snow water, used for fevers. Another contains ice-dried mint, sharper in flavor and gentler on the stomach. A third jar is labeled with a symbol, 2 crescent moons stacked, a sign for cooling treatments. Quirky tidbit for today? Ancient Persian physicians, especially during the Islamic Golden Age, documented detailed protocols for balancing the body's temperament. Heat had to be cooled, dryness moistened, and sometimes the cold wasn't just metaphorical, it was literal. Compresses, chilled infusions, even snow tonics were prescribed. Historians still debate how effective these were, but many acknowledge their sophistication. Some texts even suggest doctors would store certain medicines inside yakhchāls, awaiting use during epidemics or seasonal fevers. This fusion of architecture and medicine, of physics and healing, was quietly revolutionary. The herbalist beckons you to a table where she's preparing a cooling paste of aloe, myrtle, and ice water. She says, for burns. The sun doesn't apologize. We make do. You help her stir it. The bowl is heavy and fragrant, its contents thick and shimmering like pearl-colored mud. She places a bit of it onto a piece of cloth, folds it expertly, and places it on your wrist. "Just so you know," she says. The cool seeps through the cloth, and you feel it travel, not just across your skin, but inward, calming the pulse beneath it. You sit in silence, surrounded by jars, baskets, and bundles, each telling the same quiet story, that cold is preservation, yes, but also medicine, ritual, and memory. Eventually, the herbalist presses a vial into your hand. She says, "For headaches. Keep it cool. Use sparingly." You nod and step back into the sun, the pulse in your wrist slower now, your mind quieter. Behind you, the herbalist returns to her jars, and the apprentice is still scowling at something in his notebook. The courtyard smells like mint and stone
and cooling clay. And you walk on, once again reminded that the legacy of the yakhchāl is not just architecture. It's in the hands of healers, the syrup makers, the potters, the grandmothers, the boys with trays of ice, every one of them a quiet engineer of comfort.
By now the day is in full bloom, hot, dry, and humming with that invisible heat only desert towns know. The stones radiate warmth. Fabric hangs stiff in doorways. Even the birds keep to the shadows. And yet, tucked between the rows of sunlit rooftops and shaded courtyards, you find it. A school. Not a modern one, but an old madrasa. Its plaster cracked in places, its tiles faded from centuries of sun. Still, children's voices spill from its archways like spring water. You're drawn inside, not by curiosity, but by a soft, unmistakable sound, the clink of ceramic cups on stone. In a wide courtyard, shaded by trees, a small lesson in cooling science is underway. A teacher, thin and sunbrowned, is pouring chilled water into clay cups from a narrow-necked yakhchāl stored jug. The students, barefoot, wriggling, wide-eyed, are gathered around a diagram scratched into the dirt with a reed pen. The lesson is simple: how to stay cool without needing the impossible. The teacher gestures to the jug. "This was filled last night and left in the wind," he says. "The jug's pores breathed out the heat. The desert helped. The dome kept it safe." He lets each student sip the water, and their sighs, tiny and genuine, echo across the stones. You sit quietly at the edge of the group, unnoticed, as the teacher continues. He points to a clay model of a yakhchāl, about the size of a melon. He says, "Some say it stores ice, but what it really holds is patience." The children nod solemnly, though one seems more interested in poking the model with a twig.
Here's your quirky fact. Some yakhchāls, especially in smaller villages, doubled as classrooms or storyrooms during the off-season. Cool and dark, they were perfect places to read, chant, or nap on hot afternoons. In some regions, entire oral traditions were passed down inside their chambers, where memory was preserved as carefully as ice. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was. There's little written documentation, but many elders recall stories from their childhoods that began, "When we sat in the cold place." It's not proof, but it's something. Back in the courtyard, the teacher begins a new lesson: how to read temperature without a thermometer. He teaches them to look at how fast water dries, how mint wilts, how shadows shift. The children respond with the seriousness of miniature scholars. He ends the session by unrolling a scroll, handmade, uneven, and showing them illustrations of different yakhchāls across the region. Some wide, others narrow, a few even spiral-shaped. One child gasps at a particularly tall dome and whispers, "That one could hold a snowman." You chuckle softly. So does the teacher. He sees you now, nods once, then returns to wrapping up the lesson. The children are dismissed and scatter into the yard, chasing shadows and sipping the last of the cool water. One of them tugs at your sleeve and offers you a clay marvel, still faintly chilled from the bowl it was resting in. "For luck," she says seriously, "so you don't melt." You accept. As you leave the madrasa, your path curves through a narrow colonnade, and you can't help but think, this is what the yakhchāl truly built. Not just architecture, but inheritance, shared in sips of cold water, bits of pottery, and memory that survives because it's been passed, not written. You carry the marble in your hand as you walk, its surface warm now, but the coolness of that courtyard still tucks somewhere in your bones.
You leave the school behind as the sun reaches its zenith, casting everything into sharp relief. Noon in the desert, when even the lizards pause in their tracks, and the air itself seems to shimmer with fatigue. The town quiets now. Market stalls drape heavy cloths across their fronts. People retreat indoors. Doors close softly. But you, drawn by the pulse of the past, head once more toward the edge of the city, toward the place where all this began, the oldest still functioning yakhchāl, a dome as familiar now as the shape of your own thoughts. The wind stirs, faint and dry, teasing the hem of your tunic. You approach the dome not from the front this time, but from the rear, where few visitors go. Here, hidden beneath a tangle of thorny brush and baked earth, lies the maintenance shaft, a steep incline used long ago by builders and repairmen. You crouch to peer down the passage. It's narrow, dark, and lined with the same ancient brick, worn smooth but still doing its job. You run your fingers along its surface, and once again that unmistakable coolness pulses upward. The cold is here, still, even now. Inside the dome, unseen but imagined, lie the layers of ice, stacked and separated, protected and slowly melting. Not wasted, never wasted, but used sparingly, with purpose.
And somewhere in that darkness are the tools of upkeep: buckets, hooks, brushes, a tangle of ropes. All signs that the yakhchāl is not a monument. It's a machine. Silent, passive, alive. You sit in the sparse shade nearby, listening. The wind hisses past, and for a moment you almost think you hear it whispering the names of those who kept this cold alive: builders, bakers, potters, poets. Here's your quirky story for the hour. In one town, a poet was once hired to live beside the yakhchāl and compose verses to encourage its longevity. Not to chant spells, no, nothing so mystical, just to sit and write about the moon, the breeze, the stone and ice. The townsfolk believed that beauty helped preserve things, that the yakhchāl deserved not just labor, but art. Historians still argue whether this tale is fact, metaphor, or a misunderstanding of Sufi traditions. But fragments of verse have been found carved into the stonework of some ancient domes. Tiny couplets praising stillness, silence, and snow. You glance up at the main dome's peak, where the ventilation shaft releases excess warmth. A few lazy birds circle it now, riding thermals. The structure itself doesn't care that it's admired. It was built to serve, not to shine. And perhaps that's the lesson. Not all brilliance is loud. Not all triumphs glitter. Some just sit there, gathering cold. You walk the perimeter of the dome, your steps slow now, deliberate. At one point, you find a patch of graffiti, scratched in with something sharp but careful, a tiny drawing of what looks like a family, 3 dots and a larger one beneath a triangle. Someone's memory, someone's dome. The air grows warmer as you move out of the dome's shadow, but that's okay. You've stored enough cool inside you for now. Before leaving, you press your palm against the base of the wall once more. You think of the layers of ice inside, the water that once filled the trenches, the hands that lifted each brick. And absurdly, you find yourself whispering, "Thank you." Because this was never just about ice. It was about hope and cleverness and refusing to bow to the sun. You turn from the great dome with the quiet reverence one might offer a sleeping beast, something powerful, ancient, and strangely tender,
The path leads you now to a part of town few people think to visit, the Records Hall, an archive of dusty scrolls, faded ledgers, and cracked tablets tucked inside a domed building of its own, albeit one far less glamorous than a yakhchāl. Inside, the air is dry and musty, saturated with the breath of paper and ink. A lone clerk looks up from her desk, spectacles perched precariously on the tip of her nose. She eyes you like someone measuring a basket of dates for weight, then waves you toward a shelf labeled, charmingly, cooling and containers. You run your fingers across spines, goat leather bindings, papyrus rolls, palm-pressed codices, until you find a small, water-stained book. Its title, written in careful Persian calligraphy, roughly translates to On the Keeping of Things That Melt. Inside, a treasure trove. There are notes on ice distribution routes, including the name of a long-forgotten donkey known locally as the Frost Mule. There's a sketch of a proposed yakhchāl made entirely of glazed tiles, beautiful but never completed. And there's a full list of ingredients for a royal summer banquet, where every dish, even the roasted lamb, was served on chilled ceramic plates.
You chuckle, of course. Here's your quirky gem for the day. One official document records a lawsuit filed by a merchant claiming his neighbor stole a piece of morning ice the size of a pigeon. No one remembers who won, but the entry is dated and signed. Ice. Fleeting, fragile, and legally contested. Historians still puzzle over such notes. Some consider them mere anecdotes, marginalia, but others believe these records reflect the everyday importance of controlled cold, especially in desert towns where power wasn't just military or political, it was thermal. Further along, you find another entry, an order for a dozen ice-sealed ink pots sent to a distant monastery in the mountains where monks transcribed texts only during the hottest months. Ink bleeds when hot, the note warns. Cool the pot or lose the thought. You imagine a monk, sweat glistening, dipping his quill into a pot cooled by a shard of ice wrapped in linen, writing down stories not to be read immediately, but to last centuries, perhaps even the one you now hold. The archivist, silent until now, steps beside you and points to a wall map. Dozens of small marks, faded, almost invisible, dot a trade route that winds from Shiraz to Samarkand. Yakhchāl sites, she says, tapping the dots. Some real, some rumored.
One mark is labeled with a symbol you recognize, the spiral cone, just like the one scratched into the old cistern you saw days ago. Some think that mark was a sort of code. It meant cold nearby. Useful for traders, travelers, even lovers carrying sweets. The notion makes you smile. She offers to copy the map for you, and you accept, watching as she lays a piece of parchment flat and begins tracing each dome, each trail, each forgotten whisper of cold. And here, in the most unassuming of places, a room of dry ink and brittle paper, you feel the yakhchāl's presence most strongly. Not in ice, not in architecture, but in memory meticulously recorded. Because to remember a thing is to preserve it. To write it down is to freeze it, just not in temperature, but in time. You take the map, bow slightly in gratitude, and step back into the warm light of afternoon. Outside, the air is moving again, slightly cooler than before. Or maybe you've just learned how to carry the chill with you. The map the archivist gave you is folded carefully into your pocket, the parchment still crisp, still whispering against itself as you walk. Each step takes you deeper into the golden hush of afternoon. and the town seems to soften with the light. Shadows long, walls warm to the touch, and even the wind gentle now, less a gust, more a sigh. Your feet guide you toward the cemetery on the edge of the old quarter, not out of sadness, but curiosity. You've heard of a tomb shaped like a yakhchāl, said to belong to a builder whose domes outlasted even his memory. The cemetery is quiet, strewn with smooth stones and soft grass where it can grow. Goats wander lazily between plots. Someone has left a tray of rosewater biscuits on one grave, half eaten by birds. And there, toward the far wall, you see it, a modest, rounded dome, perhaps no taller than a camel's hump, built of the same pale brick as the great ice domes, but smaller, simpler, humble. You approach and kneel before it. There's no name carved, only a symbol etched in the stone, the spiral cone again. Beneath it, a line in old script that reads, "He who cooled what could not be cooled." A caretaker sits nearby, fanning himself slowly. He nods toward the tomb. "They say he built the first dome that lasted all summer without melting inside," the man offers. "He refused reward, said cold was for all." You nod. Somehow it fits.
Quirky detail? Some builders were buried with a brick from their finest dome, not for status, but so their body could return to stillness as it gave it. In rare cases, tombs were constructed with ventilation channels, mimicking the airflow of yakhchāls to keep the chamber cool, a symbolic echo of what they devoted their life to preserving. Historians still debate how much of this is legend, how much truth, but the architecture exists. Some tombs do breathe, if you listen closely. You rest your hand against the dome's curve. It's warm, but solid, thoughtful. A shape made for function, carried forward into ritual. You can almost imagine the builder's hands pressing the mud brick, shaping air and earth into something that could gently defeat fire. As you stand, the wind shifts again, carrying with it the faintest trace of cold stone and salt, a reminder, perhaps, or a farewell. The sun continues its slow descent, and light bathes the landscape in soft honey. You look out across the cemetery and beyond it to the horizon, where other domes rise in miniature, each one casting long shadows, like sundials carved in ice.
The spiral cone seems to appear more now that you know to look. You see it painted faintly on a pottery shard, etched into a wall near the gate, woven into a piece of cloth drying on a line. It's not a brand, not a signature. It's a promise that somewhere, even in this sea of heat and dust, someone kept the cold alive. For no glory, just grace. You take a deep breath, the map safe in your pocket, the tomb quiet behind you, and as you walk, you don't just carry history anymore. You carry temperature, memory, and a beautifully quiet kind of genius. The sun is tilting now, no longer overhead but slipping sideways across rooftops, casting amber light and long fingers of shadow into the alleys. You've looped through nearly every layer of this old town, tracing the story of ice in a place it shouldn't belong, and still the yakhchāl seems to hum beneath it all like a low drumbeat. This time your steps take you upward, to the terraces where families often gather in the evening to catch the cooler air. Rooftops here are more than roofs, they're living spaces, extensions of homes. You see a mother folding laundry beside a basin of chilled water, the cotton wrung out and snapping as it dries. A child pours rosewater over her own feet, squealing with delight. And one rooftop over,
An elderly man leans beside a small copper samovar, its steam rising lazily. He nods at you and beckons you over, as though he's been expecting you all day. Without a word, he pours 2 cups of iced saffron tea, the surface golden and flecked with tiny basil seeds. "Made with ice from the real place," he says, eyes crinkling. You sit. The rooftop offers a broad view of the town. Domes, walls, gardens, alleyways, and in the distance, the unmistakable curve of the main yakhchāl, catching the last light of the day like a pearl. The man speaks slowly, almost dreamily. "In my time, we didn't just use the ice, we celebrated it. When the first cut of ice came out clean after winter, we held a feast. No music, just cold drinks and quiet praise."
Here's a quirky fringe fact for you. In some Persian towns, spring festivals included offerings to the yakhchāl. Not religious, but ritualistic. Families left small bowls of sweet syrup, garlands of mint, or even a candle beside the dome, honoring its service. Children sometimes chalked messages on the prick, "Stay cold, please," or "Thank you, Ice Mountain." Historians still debate whether this was symbolic worship, affection, or simply habit, but evidence suggests the practice was surprisingly widespread, especially among women and food vendors who relied on steady cold for their summer work. Back on the rooftop, the man chuckles. "We were foolish once. Tried to make a new kind of dome with smooth metal walls. Melted every time." He gestures to the horizon. "You can't rush cold. It needs time, shade, and the right kind of silence." You sip your tea. It's cold but gentle, just enough to stir memory without startling the senses. A bird lands nearby, pecking at a leftover ice chip in a saucer. The man shuffles inside for a moment, returning with something cradled in cloth. A small ceramic tile. Etched into it is, you guessed it, the spiral cone.
"Pass down," he says. "My great-aunt was a bricklayer, helped build one of the domes near Yazd. They gave this to her as thanks." You trace your finger along the design. It's rough, imperfect, handmade. A reminder that preservation isn't perfection, it's persistence. He lets you hold the tile for a moment longer, then tucks it back into its cloth like it's made of gold. "Everything melts," he says. "But some things, we help last longer than they should." You sit there a while longer, neither of you talking. The tea grows warm. The sky deepens into violet. Somewhere below, a child laughs. A dog barks once, then falls silent again. And still, the yakhchāl rests on the horizon, unbothered.
Evening has settled across the town like a blanket shaken gently from above, soft, speckled with stars, and threaded with cool wind that moves through streets like a slow tide. The world feels quieter now. Even the stones seem to relax, their heat slowly drifting upward and away. You've returned once more to the base of the original yakhchāl, drawn not by purpose, but by instinct, like a moth to an inverse flame. No one else is here now. The last of the water carriers has gone. The tradesmen's voices have faded. Even the cat from the potter's courtyard is nowhere to be found. It's just you and the dome. The light is low, but enough to see the etched grooves in the bricks. You run your hand along them once more, feeling the indentations made centuries ago, where thumbs pressed mud and straw into place. The bricks are uneven, human, enduring. And then, with no ceremony at all, you descend, not into the yakhchāl, but alongside it,
through a narrow trench once used for runoff. The passage curls like a question mark, and you walk until you reach the ventilation pool. Dry now, but still cool to the touch. You sit there. Let the quiet settle. The dome above you now is just a curve of shadow in the sky. Its edges blur into the stars. You can't tell where architecture ends and constellation begins. And it strikes you, this isn't just about the past. This was an answer to the desert itself. A decision not to fight heat with fire, but with shape, breath, and humility. Here's one more quirky treasure before the end. In some oral traditions, bride prices included ice privileges, access to a household's yakhchāl shares for a period of weeks. The gesture wasn't about extravagance, but comfort, security, the gift of waking up on a summer morning to cold water in a warm room. Historians still argue whether this was literal or symbolic, maybe both. But in either case, it tells you something. That ice was more than refreshment. It was currency, community, commitment. You lie back against the slope and watch as a breeze moves across the dome, rustling dust and dry grass. No grandeur, just a whisper. You think of all the hands that built this place. Men, women, children, engineers, dreamers. Not for power, not for palaces, but so someone, somewhere, could sip cold tea, could keep medicine fresh, could carry honeyed fruit to a wedding without it turning sour.
So someone could feel the kiss of winter in the throat of summer. And you wonder, almost sleepily, what the dome would say if he could speak, not loudly, but in that hush it knows so well. Maybe, "You're welcome," or "It worked," or even, "Sleep now, I've got this." You closed your eyes, and somewhere in the thick silence, beneath stars and stone, ice that has waited all day finally begins to melt. Not in waste, but in rhythm. You wake, or half wake, to the gentle hush of night wrapping itself around the town. Everything is slower now, softer. The heat has fully retreated, leaving behind a kind of breathless balance, neither warm nor cold, just still. Above you, the yakhchāl looms as a silhouette against the stars. What once seemed monumental now feels almost weightless, like a hill made of moonlight and memory. You rise and walk once more, not because there is more to see, but because your body remembers the shape of moving in the cool. The streets are empty. Even the lanterns flicker low as though embarrassed to still be awake. Past the bakery where embers glow under ash. Past the hammam where the baths have gone cold and the water rests. Past that first little courtyard where the boy carried ice on a tray, now quiet, the rose bushes tucked in to sleep. And then, your last stop. You find yourself at a well-worn stone bench beside a dried-up fountain. Nothing grand, no legend tied to this spot, but someone has left a jar of preserved lemons on the ledge, and beside it, a folded cloth embroidered with the spiral cone. You smile. You sit. The cloth smells faintly of mint and clay, and you realize this is how knowledge is passed here. Not in museums, not in plaques, but in objects used, inherited, and shared. A jar, a tile, a scoop of shaved ice passed hand to hand on a summer evening.
Quirky bit for tonight. In some villages, there's a game children still play called Find the Chill. One hides a pebble that's been left overnight in a shaded bowl. The others seek it out by feel alone. The winner gets first sip from the shared clay jug. Historians don't study that, but maybe they should, because that's the legacy too. Joy made out of scarcity, connection made from care, tradition built without a name.
You lean back, and above you, stars shift slowly across the sky. Old, quiet, steady. The town sleeps now, and you feel it. You're ready to as well. You've walked the spiral path, from trench to dome, from cup to scroll. You've touched the bricks, tasted the ice, heard the sigh of generations who learned not to conquer heat, but to outwit it, gently, patiently. This is where your journey ends. But the cold, it carries on, preserved not just in ice, but in story.
Let the story begin to fade now. Breathe in slowly, letting the quiet of that ancient desert night settle into your chest like a hush. You're still sitting on that stone bench, still tracing the outline of the dome with your eyes, but it's all grown slower, like the air thickened with dreams. You can feel the coolness lingering in your palms, as if the memory of ice is a temperature of its own. The stars overhead seem to hold their breath with you, and the town lies curled around its old sleeping domes, each one still keeping time.
You've seen how cold was carried across sand, how it was guarded with care and passed between hands, wrapped in straw, buried in stone, remembered in poems. You've followed that spiral not just as a design, but as a rhythm, a reminder that not all things go in straight lines. Some circle back, some deepen over time. And now you're circling into rest. Let your breath match the slow rise and fall of silence. Let your thoughts melt gently away, like ice in a shaded bowl. No rush, no force, just quiet surrender.
The builders are resting. The water is still. The wind has softened, and the dome, it watches over all. Sleep now. You've traveled far and wisely. You've seen the shape of coolness carved into history, and it's waiting for you always. Right here, in the quiet, in the cold, in the calm.